As Israel fights Hamas in Gaza, the world watches as the stability of the Middle East is in doubt. Good evening and thanks for joining us for this special Faith Nation from the CBN studio in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, Israel's war against Hamas has caused mass civilian casualties in Gaza, but the number killed may not be as clear as thought. Most major news outlets cite statistics from a Hamas-run organization to report the number of Palestinians killed in Gaza. Some analysts say those figures are too high. CBN's Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Tragically, uninvolved Palestinians have died in the more than 200-day war Hamas began on October 7th.
Of course, we have to start by saying that every human being whose life is lost is a terrible tragedy, and we're all created in the image of God.
Gil Huffman, director of Honest Reporting, a media watchdog group, recently published an investigative report on how Hamas has inflated the number of civilian casualties in Gaza.
Terrorists are not journalists. They're not people who should be trusted. And their numbers that they're putting out are part of their propaganda game to try to win the world's sympathy, and it's unfortunately working.
The Gaza Ministry of Health, overseen by Hamas, publishes those numbers. Currently, its death toll reporting stands at more than 35,000. Huffman says those numbers have been parroted throughout the war by world leaders, including President Biden, and global media like the Associated Press.
You know, the world media, they try to be balanced. So Israel says this. Israel says that based on the studies taken by the world's top experts on urban warfare, Israel set a gold standard in preventing the loss of civilian life. So they put out our side. And then the other side, they put out, well, Hamas says that Israel is committing genocide. It doesn't work that way.
Professor of Statistics Abraham Weiner from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania wrote how the Gaza Ministry of Health fakes casualty numbers. The data scientist studied Hamas statistics from the war's beginning using a graph and concluded, here's the problem with this data. The numbers are not real. That much is obvious to anyone who understands how naturally occurring numbers work. The casualties are not overwhelmingly women and children, and the majority may be Hamas fighters. This data also does not include the estimated 14,000 Hamas fighters killed in combat, or Palestinians killed by misfired rockets, estimated by some to be nearly 1,000. The Foundation for the Defense of Democracies also reported this month that the Gaza Health Ministry cannot provide names for more than 10,000 it says have died.
We previously knew they had incomplete records for this set of people of at least 10,000, but from both Wall Street Journal reporting and from an item on the ministry's own social media feed, they've indicated they don't have names, so they can't really identify these individuals. It's really one more drop in a bucket on a broader credibility issue.
Asdanik also noted the Gaza Ministry of Health got its information from unidentified, quote, reliable media sources.
At first, that was only about 22%, but then it became an increasing percentage over time. So we got to a point where nearly 45% of the alleged deceased were based on these media reports.
In the latest revision, the UN published a report that reduced the number of women and children killed in the war by nearly half. They clarified later that their overall estimate of the number killed in the war remains the same. They explain the revision to the fog of war. It's not the only example of suspected death tolls. Near the beginning of the war, the media reported Israel killed 500 at the Al-Ahli hospital. Later, it was discovered a misfired rocket by Islamic Jihad killed far less civilians in the next-door parking lot. Abu Shlouf, the spokesperson for Islamic Jihad, admitted it was a lie.
Yes, in order to erase this story, the organization made several moves. It fabricated a story that the rocket belonged to the occupation and the target was a hospital building. They relied on some of the stories of the international press.
And after that, they published it to the whole world?
Yes.
First of all, I acknowledge that sadly, there are civilians, non-combatants that have been killed in battle. sadly. And that is not the intention of the IDF. I think the IDF has gone to tremendous lengths in order to minimize the amount of non-combatants that have been affected by this war. And I, as a human being, I regret any civilian who loses his life as a part of a fight that they didn't start.
Former IDF spokesman Jonathan Conricus, now with the FDD, says Hamas has rigged the battlefield.
We must remember who embeds himself within the civilian population and abuses everything that is supposed to be protected under international law. Hospitals, schools, mosques, UN facilities, infirmaries, and everything else. The organization that does that is Hamas. And had Hamas chosen to fight out in the open, and not to use civilians as human shields, not to tunnel underneath civilian neighborhoods, and not to hide behind civilian infrastructure, then of course there wouldn't be any civilian casualties.
Despite Hamas using human shields, according to military historian John Spencer, the ratio of civilian deaths to combatants is near historic lows for urban warfare. Even so, Huffman says, regrettably, the charge of genocide has spread worldwide, into the streets and across social media.
That ridiculous accusation for a war that started with the Hamas sending people into Israel to kill as many Jews as they could, and Israel doing everything possible to minimize civilian deaths. And unfortunately, that accusation is still out there, and that's just anti-Semitic to accuse Israel of that when the facts are just so obvious to be the opposite.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
The plight of hostage families extends beyond Israel. See their first-hand stories when Faith Nation returns. When Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, terrorists took scores of Israeli Jews as hostages, but they also captured Israeli Arabs and other foreign nationals. One Israeli Bedouin family was hit especially hard. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us their story.
27-year-old Bashir al-Zayadna, a Bedouin Arab and law student, saw his life turned upside down by the events of October 7th.
I'm the spokesman of my family here in Tel Aviv, in the family's headquarters and the family's forum of the hostages. I had 4 family members kidnapped on the 7th of October and held as hostages as well.
Bashir's uncle Yosef and 3 of his children were working at the dairy in Kibbutz Cholit when Hamas attacked.
At 7:30 in the morning, they were captured. We saw photos, videos of them being held by Hamas. Very hard images, very hard footage.
Hamas released one son, Bilal, and daughter Aisha after nearly 2 months because they were both under 18.
They told us that they had almost no food. They've told us that they have been staying deep down in the tunnels. They've told us that although the guards of Hamas spoke Arabic and they speak also Arabic, they never shared a word together, never spoke together. All 4 of them were staying in the same room, and their guards gave 4 of them each one a Quran book, which is the Islamic holy book. It was very hard for them to stay in captivity.
Yosef and his son Hamza remain captive.
The father, who's 53 years old, who is still held as hostage in Gaza, has diabetes, and we know that he doesn't take his medications. Hamza al-Ziyadna is 22 years old, also still held as captive in Gaza by Hamas. He has migraines, and he also doesn't take his medication.
Unfortunately, the tragic impact doesn't end there.
I have a cousin of mine, whose name is Abdurrahman. He was murdered on the 7th of October by Hamas. He was murdered alongside his wife, who happened to be a Jew. They believed in coexistence and they could coexist together. They just fell in love and got married. They were just having fun in Zakim Beach. They stayed the night there, and we woke up with a very sad message of them.
Bashir, who lived in Sderot, wasn't there that day.
Luckily, I went to my mother's place the weekend it happened. I was in Rahat on the 7th of October. And now I am in Tel Aviv because I have been evacuated from Gaza envelope to the center of Israel.
Another relative became a hero.
I'm an Arab Bedouin. I'm proud to be Israeli. I personally saved the lives of 30 people on that Black Sabbath.
Yosef Al-Zayadna, a bus driver, provided transportation at the site of the Nova Music Festival. He tells CBN News he had dropped off passengers there earlier and planned to pick them up the afternoon of October 7th.
Around 6 a.m., the phone rang. I saw on the phone the name Amit Adar, the guy that had ordered the transport. He said, "Yosef, save us." I said, "What is it?" He said, "There's a mess, alarms, rockets. There are terrorists." I didn't think twice. I started my car and drove there.
Despite rockets, gunfire, and terrorists, he successfully rescued 30 people, packing them into his 14-seat bus.
All the young people that are brought back, thanks to God, they returned whole. No one was murdered. No one was kidnapped.
Later, Hamas found Yosef's phone number on Facebook, called and threatened him.
For me, we're all human beings. There are good and there are bad people. And I did this as a person, a human being. In the end, we're one people, and this is our country, and we must live together.
This is a miracle that he went there and got out without any damage.
Bashir says the reaction of Israelis following the attack truly surprised him.
We saw people in Israel from all parts of the Israeli society come together, stand together, and fight together and help each other. It doesn't matter if they were Jews, Arabs, Christians, Druzi, Muslims, liberals, Orthodox Jews. You saw all Israelis come together and behave like one big society that lifted one another.
Bashir says he's never viewed Hamas as representing Muslims or Palestinians. To him, it's a radical terrorist organization. That's one reason Bashir believes there's still hope for peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
We should find the common things we cherish, and we should find focus on them, and we should find a way to heal our wounds and also fight for a better future for both of us, Israelis and Palestinians. What happened on the 7th of October should never happen again, and what is happening right now in Gaza should also never happen again.
Bashir says he wants people to pray for the war and violence to end and for peace in the world. Julie Stahl, CBN News.
Coming up, Israel insists winning the war in Gaza can only happen with the elimination of Hamas. What the Rafah invasion means for the stability of the Middle East. Next. Welcome back. For months, debate has raged over Israel entering Rafah to eliminate what's believed to be the last major Hamas stronghold. Now, some parents who've lost their kids since the fighting began are sending a clear message to the Israeli government. Get the job done. Here again is Chris Mitchell.
After the rally, the parents of those who died in Gaza on their way to the entrance of the city saying victory must be now.
We are over than 150 families that lost the kids since October 7th at the war. And we got together because we want to continue our kids' missions. Our kids, they went to fight against the Hamas. And we feel if the government will continue the war in a way how it's supposed to be, we're going to feel that our kids they died for nothing.
Noah's 20-year-old son Amit died while commanding his soldiers in Gaza.
They told us that all the time he was very small, but all the time he on the back, all the weapons and everything was on his back. He said, "Okay, I will take from here. I will take from here. I want that everything will be easy for them, but I'm very strong. I'm the commander."
They carry pictures of their fallen sons and daughters while urging action, believing the path to victory is through Rafah.
It's really about to send the message to our government. Don't give up to the pressure that's coming from Biden. Give the army the order, go into Rafah now. We believe that the key to destroy the Hamas is through getting to Rafah, Sinwar staying there, our hostages in Rafah. The only way to get them back and to win the war through Rafah.
Meanwhile, they worry about U.S. pressure on Israel to hold off.
When we started the war, we felt that Biden understands that we don't have a choice and we need to destroy the Hamas. Recently, I don't know, maybe it's the politics in America behind that pressure that's coming from America. But we don't care about Biden politics. We care about the security of our nation, of our land. And we know that the key is to go into Rafah.
Jeff Daub came to show his support.
And these parents feel that what we have got to do in order to make the loss of their children worthwhile, meaningful, is to complete this operation and to eradicate Hamas completely.
Daub says Israel's goals follow the same goals pursued by the U.S. in recent conflicts.
When a fire department comes to answer a call and to put out a fire, they put out the fire entirely. They don't put out 80% of the fire and leave 20% of the fire burning. When the Americans and the coalition came in to eradicate ISIS, they eradicated them completely. They didn't leave them in Raqqa. They didn't leave them in Fallujah. They didn't leave them in Mosul and say, well, you know, we've completed most of the operation.
They also know the Middle East is watching.
We have no doubt that if we're not finished with the Hamas, if we're not going to destroy the Hamas, it's going to send a message to the rest of our enemies that they can deal with us. And we believe that if we're going to go into Rafah and finish with kill Sinwar and the rest of the Hamas forces, it's going to send a message to the rest of our enemies, don't play with Israel.
They say Western civilization is at stake.
But we are also very, very concerned that there have been efforts to undermine our efforts here, and that is to the ultimate loss of Western civilization, of the United States and our allies, because if we allow Hamas off the hook here now, it will give a tremendous tailwind to Islamic fundamentalist jihadists.
It's not only for the Israel future, it's also about the whole West, Europe, including America. If this war we're not going to end with destroying the Hamas, it's going to send a message to all the Muslim radical at the world. You can do it with Europe, you can do it also with America. So Mr. Biden, think about that. Leave the politics in America to the side and think about the great moment that we have here, that it's an opportunity to finish with the terror.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Young evangelicals and standing with Israel. When we come back, a look at the shifting support for the Jewish state among younger American Christians. As Israel's war against Hamas continues, some of the Jewish state's strongest supporters are evangelical Christians here in the United States. New research, however, shows that support is slipping among younger evangelicals. CBN's Paul Strand has reaction from Israel.
As recently as 5 years ago, 2/3 of young American evangelicals fully supported Israel, while only 5% backed the Palestinian cause. The latest polling shows, though, since then, that support for Israel has plunged to just 1/3, while support for Palestinians is up to 25%. We asked Jerusalem Post commentator Professor Gil Troy what he makes of this startling drop-off in support for the Jewish nation.
So is this poll a warning sign? Absolutely. But is this a time to panic? Absolutely not.
Gil Troy points out a vast majority of Americans, including evangelicals, still back the Jewish nation.
80% of Americans are supporting Israel. God bless the evangelical community, because we've seen for decades how stalwart the evangelical Christians have been, and we really feel a brotherhood and are very, very grateful.
Part of the change in young evangelical support comes because they have moved away from pro-Israeli media and toward mainstream and social media that Troy warns persistently portray Israel as an oppressor and an aggressor nation.
Beware of poison sources, of TikTok, of social media, of reducing a very complicated conflict, which has its dimensions, to a soundbite or to a tweet. We now call it an X. Go and learn. Plunge into the conflict. I am confident that we have truth on our side.
What do youth consistently hear from anti-Israel sources?
It's Israel the bully against the small Palestinians, when of course the Palestinians are part of a broader Arab world, part of an Iranian axis, which has billions, which targets little Israel.
Troy says if young people will take the time to research unbiased, balanced sources, they'll find that many Hamas and Palestinian supporters back genocide against the Jewish people and wiping Israel off the map, and more.
When our young people take a plunge in and see the truth and get beyond some of the propagandizing of some of these oversimplified professors and these influencers on TikTok, they'll see that this is a civilizational battle. Israel the Jewish people, Zionists, Americans, liberals, conservatives, it doesn't matter who, we're all together defending freedom and defending equality. That's who we are. That's our fight today.
Israel may well become much less of an American priority, and that could mean this strong U.S. ally and the Middle East's only democracy might receive much less American military aid. Troy, though, shares a more optimistic view of the future.
If you look at polling over the last 30, 40 years, the older you get, the more pro-Israel you are. You tend to grow into that. And the more you distance yourself from some of the propagandizing that's going on college campuses, the more pro-Israel and pro-America you are. And that's the two strands of the DNA, pro-Israel, pro-America together. And once our young people understand that, once our young people see how our fates are intertwined, it's not only that we have a common enemy, but we also have a shared fate and shared values and a shared future.
Only time will tell which view comes true. Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks for watching this edition of Faith Nation. Have a great night.